Welcome back to the Christian I Ching. This is the lecture on the moving lines, and I'm Roger Sessions. My goal in this unit is to describe in more detail this whole concept of moving and static lines and show how they relate to another important concept, which is starting and resulting archetypes. So that's what we're going to look at in this lecture. When you pose a query to the I Ching, you're usually going to receive a response that's going to say, this is where you are now, this is the energy that's operating on you, and this is where you're likely headed, given where you started and the energy that's operating on you. I often like to use the analogy of a kayak to describe the response that the I Ching is going to give to you. Austin is a great area for kayaking. I love kayaking, so maybe I just relate well to this particular analogy. So if you're thinking about where you are and how your ride in the kayak is going to go, there are three pieces of information you need to know. Where are you now in relationship to the river? What are the currents that are operating on you? In other words, what is the energy that is operating on the kayak? And where is this current, where is the energy likely to take the kayak, given where you started and where the river is going and what the energy is doing? So where are you? What are the currents and where are these currents going to bring you? Remember in the lecture when I was talking about archetypes, I talked about all these moving lines. Well, the moving lines are the currents. These are the energy flows that are operating on you. They're in the form of moving lines. So when we have a moving line, that represents a particular energy flow. And as I said, usually there's going to be two, maybe three discrete energy flows operating on you. But in this particular reading, I received four, and I've seen as many as six, and sometimes you have none. We'll discuss those options later. But whatever it is, the response that you're going to get is also going to tell you which lines are moving. With the I Ching, the archetype represents a position. So we're going to have a starting archetype and a resulting archetype. And the moving lines are the currents that are going to take us from the starting archetype to the resulting archetype. So we're always going to want to know the pictographic representation of the archetype we're starting with, which lines are moving, because that's the energy flows that we have to deal with, and then the resulting archetype, or the hexagram, which is going to be the pictographic representation for that archetype. Now you don't actually receive a resulting hexagram or resulting archetype. What you actually receive is something a little bit simpler than that. You receive a starting hexagram and a set of moving lines. And you need to figure out, given that starting hexagram and these moving lines, what is the resulting hexagram? In other words, what is the pictographic representation of the resulting archetype? So let me show you how you do that. When you take a starting hexagram and you apply the moving lines to it, and then you see, starting with this and these moving lines, what's the result? Here's the rule. We do this line by line, starting from the bottom line, the first position, which is the lowest position in the hexagram. And we say that the resulting hexagram is going to have the same line as the corresponding line in the starting hexagram, unless that line was moving. If that line was moving, then it's going to flip to its opposite. So if it was an open line, it'll turn into a solid line. If it was a solid line, it'll turn into an open line. But only if it was a moving line. So if it was not a moving line, if it started as open, it continues to being open in the resulting archetype. And if it started as solid, it ends up as solid. So here, if we look at the starting hexagram, the pictographic representation for the starting archetype, the first line, the bottom position, is a moving line. It starts out as solid, but it's a moving line, so it transforms into its opposite. So the corresponding line in the resulting hexagram is going to be an open, because that's the opposite of a solid. The second line, second from the bottom, of course, the second line started out as open, but it was a moving line. Again, it was a moving line, so it switches to its opposite. The opposite of an open line is a solid line. So the second line in the resulting hexagram is a solid, even though the second line in the starting hexagram was an open, but it flipped because of the moving nature of it. The third line is also moving, so it started out as solid. It switches to its opposite. The opposite of solid is open, so the third line in the resulting hexagram is an open line. The fourth line starts out as solid, just like the third line started out, but the fourth line is not a moving line. So when we're figuring out the corresponding line in the resulting hexagram, since it's not moving, that line remains the same. So the fourth line it is the same as the fourth line in the starting hexagram, since the fourth line is not moving. So it started as solid, it ends up as solid. Had it started out as open, it would have ended up as open. In fact, we see that exact same situation in the fifth line. The fifth line starts out as an open line in the starting hexagram, fifth position from the bottom. Starts out as open, it's not moving, so it remains an open line in the resulting hexagram. The sixth line, the top line, started out as solid, but it was a moving line. So as a moving line, it transforms into its opposite, which is a open line. So you can see that if you compare the starting hexagram to the resulting hexagram, the lines that were moving are the opposites, are opposite of each other, and the lines that were not moving or static are the same. So in this particular case, we only had two static lines, the lines in the fourth and fifth position. So the fourth and fifth positions have the same lines in the starting hexagram and the resulting hexagram, and the rest of the lines are flipped. And we always start starting hexagram. So if it starts with open, it flips to solid. If it started solid, it flips to open. You can see that when we're going to get a response then, there are three critical pieces of information we need to get as part of this response. We need to know which lines are solid, which lines are open, and which lines are moving. Once we know that, then we can construct the resulting archetype. We know the starting archetype, that would be the 6 lines. We know the moving lines, that would be something that we were told. From those two pieces of information, we can construct the resulting archetype, the resulting hexagram. Now, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, but most teachings readings will have at least one moving line, but not all of them. I've seen as many as 6. I've seen as few as none. When a reading line doesn't have any moving lines, then there is no resulting archetype or no resulting hexagram, and the only thing we have is a starting point. We have no moving lines to read. So we're moving pretty far in our study of the Christian I Ching. We now know about how to construct a resulting hexagram from a starting hexagram, which will lead us from a starting archetype to a resulting archetype. You understand something about the moving lines. But now we need to start looking in more depth at how do we actually receive this information. So we'll be going through that in the coming lectures. I'm Roger Sessions, and I hope you'll be joining me again soon.